And this presentation is Karen Eubanks talking to us about reading during COVID and how it affects our life. So Karen, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Whoa, what happened here?
Oh, that's just how the screen changed.
Oh, okay. So, when the pandemic started, I thought there was going to be a lot of time to read, and I thought, oh boy, I'll wallow in books and come out the other side happier and smarter. And like many things during this pandemic, that's not how things went. I couldn't focus. I would read a few pages, check Twitter, read a few pages, turn on the news, read a few pages, check online newspapers. And it wasn't just me. And I think this is really interesting. Many of my friends, not only in Alpena, but around the world, were having the same trouble. It seemed like a cruel joke to be stuck at home with all the time in the world to read and not be able to focus at all. My breakthrough finally came with John M. Barrie's The Great Influenza. And when I think about it, this probably makes sense. I was obsessing about the pandemic, so reading about it just fed the obsession, and it felt like something I needed. As time moved on, and the U.S. was responding with shock and anger at the killing of George Floyd, I added books on racial equity. And finally, I've returned to a somewhat normal reading pattern, though not completely. Um, so I'll be talking about pandemic books. I'll be talking about books on racial equity, both fiction and nonfiction in both categories. And finally, I want to share the escapist fluff that I'm so addicted to. So the book that got me back to reading was The Great Influenza, the story of the deadliest pandemic in history by John M. Barrie. This book, though it certainly dealt with, sometimes in great detail, um, the medical and political horrors of the era, it comforted me a lot. The most important thing I learned was that we, in our time and place, are not unique. Others in the past faced the same things we're facing now: a deadly disease raging through the country, and a political disconnect that made fighting it more difficult. But this is the thing: they survived. They lived to become parents, grandparents, great grandparents, and if they did it, so can we. This turned out to be the perfect book at the perfect time, which I found to be a bit strange. So a bit about this strange book, or at least my strange experience of it. Um, the book, in an informal way, is divided into two distinct parts. The first part is devoted to science and the history of medicine. Now, you all know me, and this is not my bailiwick. Um, but it um, but it begins with the pre-Socratics, which I actually do like very much, and it moves through the pathology of the epidemic that occurred then. Along the way, we learned about evolutions in science, the rise of medical schools in the United States in particular, but some abroad, and the quest to develop a vaccine that would save the world from what was misnamed the Spanish flu. Though medicine in general and science in particular may not be my strong suits, I read it diligently, working very hard to understand the information presented. At times I did find that a bit of an effort, but the effort was well worth it. But about midway through, the focus of the book changed completely. The second part of the book describes the world in which the 1918 pandemic was raging. The total feel of the book changes at that point. The emphasis shifts from explaining the science and introducing the scientists to describing the flu spread, its impact on human beings, and how they fought against or fought to ignore what was happening. As a reader, I went from working to understand the information presented to me because I felt it was very important, to being engulfed in the story as it unfolded. I couldn't put the book down at that point. I was overwhelmed by the stories Barry was telling and by how our time is echoing so closely their time. It strangely brought my world into focus. So if you decide to read this book and you find yourself bogged down with the ton of information in the first part, overwhelmed by the science and the history of science, don't give up. Abandon the first part of that book and move on to the chapter titled Explosion. That's where the human history of the book begins. And it's just as important as the scientific history. And it is engrossing. It is a page turner. And most of the people who have had the problem I recommended, that I recommended this to, really found that their view of the book changed. I think some even went back to read the first part. Another thing I discovered during the pandemic is that I like short stories and novellas, which I wasn't particularly attracted to before. At first, reading short stories and novellas may have been my way of handling my inability to focus. But I've come to enjoy them and respect them so much that I'm pretty sure they're going to become a part of my reading life. If you want to read something shortish, Catherine Mcwhorter's Pale Horse, Pale Rider might be a good place to start. The author herself contracted the Spanish flu during the pandemic and almost died. In fact, at the time she got the flu, she was recovering from tuberculosis. And this story is based on her experiences, and it's powerful, evocative, and beautifully written. I mean, it lives on the page, which I absolutely love. And not only does it give you a glimpse into the disease itself, it captures the feel of the time, the social pressure to carry on, buy bonds, the attempt to live a normal life against the war, go to work, fall in love, go to the theater, while a pandemic is raging. It's a powerful story. If you decide to read it, Pale Horse, Pale Rider is part of the collection named after, and the title of the entire collection is also Pale Horse, Pale Rider. So that sort of got me hooked on short stories. Another book that absolutely intrigued me was Albert Camus' The Plague. Camus didn't actually live through an epidemic, but this book rang true to me. Having done a lot of research on plagues, he seemed to capture the feel of what we're going through now. Set in the French Algerian city of Oran, during the time of the plague, it describes the actions and fates of characters who have been thrown together by the dire circumstances which they find themselves in. Camus considered this book to be absurdist. Others have considered it to be existentialist. And the existential strain is truly apparent in that it describes a world in which individuals are responsible for their own fates, where their success or failure depends on their own actions and their own character. Popularly, this was considered to be an allegory for the Nazi occupation of France, but Camus never really admitted that. But whether or not it's true, it certainly fits. Ultimately, The Plague is a story of striving and survival. And again, it gave me hope that these fictional characters, with all their flaws, because it's definitely a warts and all description of the people working in Iran, they survived, most of them. Quickly, a few other books you might want to look at. The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe is very, very short and dreamlike. And right now, Poe certainly seems to fit the mood. Gabriel Garcia Marquez' Love in the Time of Cholera is set during a time when cholera was circling the globe, but it's really a love story set against the background of cholera. It's wry, it's witty, and somewhat strange. And I think and the title is from one specific character claiming that love is indeed like cholera. So I think we get more of, our knowledge about cholera from what we're reading about this very strange and quite quirky love story. Finally, I read Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel so long ago that I don't remember much about it, except that there is an epidemic of monumental proportions, and it rearranges the world. But it's set here in our part of the country. She's a Canadian, but she said this post-pandemic world, this dystopian adventure in northern Lower Michigan. In fact, you will recognize the Petoskey Public Library as an important institution in this book. So it could be fun to read. And nobody can accuse St. John Mandel of being a typical writer. Things I have on my list to read about pandemic is Pale Rider, a nonfiction by Laura Spinney. I think that's how it's pronounced. The Decameron by Boccaccio, and The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett, which I understand is about the length of a Bible. But those are my those have been my pandemic readings and what I look forward to reading. It looks like Galaxy S10 wants to enter. She is waiting in the waiting room. But as you know, the pandemic is not the only thing we're trying to come to terms with in the U.S. right now. We're also being forced to confront the historic problem of racial inequities in the U.S. This reckoning is long overdue, but maybe the timing in other ways is good. We've slowed down. We've been slowed down by the pandemic, and many of us now have time to take a good hard look at ourselves and decide if this is the people we want to be. There are a lot of good books out there to help us begin our journey, both fiction and nonfiction. So I'll start with nonfiction. Oddly, I'm going to start with two books written by South Africans, both of whom were born under apartheid and saw the apartheid state fall. The first book, one that I highly recommend, is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I know most of you on this conference have read that book. Though the author is South African and the events he describes takes place in South Africa, it describes the oppressive conditions of systemic racism by one who is a victim of that oppression. There are a lot of overlaps between what he describes in South Africa and some of the structural and systemic problems we have in the U.S. today. Trevor Noah, the author, was born in South Africa under apartheid and witnessed the changes that its end brought forth. He's a biracial child, and that means he was illegal in South Africa when he was born. His father, who was white, and his mother, who was black, could both have been jailed because of the crime they had committed in having sex and having him. He, as their son, a product of their crime, could have been sent to an orphanage. When apartheid ended, Noah found himself in a world that was both old and new. Old attitudes toward racism remained, and old conditions of being raised in a world where blacks did not have the same access to tools for success as whites, such as education, family wealth and land, good food, and the myriad of other things that separate the haves from the have-nots and act as roadblocks to a productive future. Noah takes us with him on this journey from childhood through adolescence to young adult, and he does it with humor, grace, and intelligence and authority. It's quite a journey, and it's also a good description of structural racism does to human beings. I highly recommend it. It's hysterically funny, warm, educational, and compelling. Be aware, though, as most of you know, um, he uses a lot of profanity, which does not bother me, but it's almost as if profanity in some cases substitutes for punctuation marks. Um, if you enjoy listening to audiobooks, this is a real treat. Noah reads it himself, and he's pitch perfect. You might want to couple this, however, if profanity is something you need to be soothed down from. Desmond and Mfo Tutu's Made for Goodness is, I thought, really eye-opening. Tutu is a South African Anglican archbishop and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. He worked to help end apartheid in South Africa, and when he was appointed to chair the Truth and Reconciliation Committee by Nelson Mandela. Mfo is his daughter, who is following in her father's footsteps as a pastor in the Anglican Church. In Made for Goodness, they write about how Tutu's deep faith and firm belief in God's love and goodness informed his anti-apartheid work. And all the while, he's out there fighting in the streets for apartheid to be ended. It describes a lifetime of fighting for the cause. In it, he also describes his faith and how it got him through his struggle, and his firm belief in the power of love and goodness. Importantly, it's an intimate look at probably one of the most influential people of our time. And you do seem to get into the heart of the man. So I highly recommend that. Okay, now we go into the oops. By now, everybody has heard of the book White Fragility. And the book is, to say the least, highly problematic. But in my opinion, it's a must-read. At least the first part of it is a must-read. In the first part, D'Angelo explains structural very dry mouth. Systemic racism, as well as anybody I've ever read, in words that the average person can understand. This is rare and valuable, and it really does need to be read, so I strongly suggest you read the first part. The second part of the book is at best problematic, misguided. This is the part where D'Angelo describes the workshops she gives. In it, she manages to demean and defend both Black and white people, especially middle-class white women. And I'm afraid that the result of her writing and her workshops could be to divide people who are trying desperately to work with one another. These two quotes from an NPR article pretty much echoes what I thought on reading the second part of the book. The Washington Post's Carlos Lozada said the book employs circular logic, and that white fragility views people of color as almost entirely powerless, and the few with influence do not wield it in the service of racial justice. Now here's my favorite, because I really like John Mcwhorter's writings. He's a linguist, and I believe he teaches at Columbia or Yale, not sure. Columbia, it says right here. The quote is, Mcwhorter, who is Black, adds to the criticism, writing in The Atlantic, that the book openly infantilizes Black people and simply dehumanizes us. There are lots of articles critical works on this book, and you can find it if you Google the title online. If you do decide to read the book, you really should look at the criticism first before you launch into the second part of the book. So I highly recommend the first part of the book, and I'm highly skeptical about the second. You might also want to read Ta-Nehisi Coates' We Were 8 Years in Power. I read it forever ago, but it's described as, not remembered by me, that, let's see, Coates' iconic essays were published in the Atlantic along with 8 fresh essays that revisit each year of the Obama administration through Coates' own experience, observations, and intellectual development. There's also some fiction I would like to recommend, and I'll sort of speed things up here. Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Water Dancer is amazing. It's a highly researched slave narrative, but it's fiction. But he read copious numbers of slave narratives and kind of imbibed them before he turned them into a piece of fiction. Let's see, it is follows the lives and adventures of the fictional character Karen Walker, the son of a slave-owning father and a slave mother whom the father sold away from the plantation. Though the conditions of slavery are explored in depth, this book is at heart a love story and a story about family. Hiram and his family, broken apart by slavery, and the master-slave division, longs for family, searches for family, and attempts to create a family in the absence of a biological one. This is the theme that touched me most. And it also brought to mind that we still have laws and customs that separate Black families. The over-incarceration of Black men, in the not so long past, welfare rules that denied help to families if there was a father present in the home. And those are just a few of the things we've come to accept as normal. And then the book is considered magical realism. I think maybe the category of magical realism has grown too broad, and this might be better suited in a different category. So now I'm just going to recommend a few other fiction. We have The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead that explores the relationship between young Black men and the penal system. Won the Pulitzer Prize. His other book, The Underground Railroad, which is magical realism, also won a Pulitzer Prize. He's a very, very good writer. So you might take those a look-see. Into the past, Ralph Ellis's The Invisible Man is powerful, gut-wrenching, published in 1952. You would think that it was published yesterday, and also I think it is one of the fathers of much of our writing, fictional writing on race today. One of my very, very favorites is The Sellout by Paul Beatty. It's a Booker Prize winner, maybe one of my favorite books of all time. It's hysterically funny. It's extremely quirky. The literary construction is Dickensian, literally. He sets it in a place called Dickens, and he is writing in the modern version of the style of Dickens. So it's a combination between Dickens and Monty Python. You have to absolutely understand that it's funny. I know someone who read it and didn't realize it was supposed to be funny and thought it was just really frightening and horrible. But if you understand the humor in a young Black man standing in a bakery, licking an Oreo while listening to a pretentious Black educator pontificate then you will really appreciate the sellout. But, okay, all of these things are wonderful. They're well written. One can be proud of reading them, but they're not they're not a good wallow in a pretty questionable book. So, escapism. In the beginning, I couldn't read for fun. I was reading with things that matched my mood. But after a while, I did start integrating the fun fluff that I love so much into my reading. I mean, my typical reading pattern is something respectable and good, and then something totally fluffy and that most people would admit to their friends that they read. My two favorite feel-good books, now these aren't fluff, are A Gentleman in Moscow by Immortals and The Day the World Came to Town by Jim DeFeed. A Gentleman in Moscow is charming, fun, sophisticated. It tells the story of a Russian aristocrat who has been tried and convicted by the Communist Party because of his position in society. But because of his past, he has written an important revolutionary poem. So instead of being sentenced to prison, he is sentenced to live in the luxurious Hotel Metropole, which really is a place, and it is a luxury hotel. He settled in an old storage room in this building where his family had owned a very nice apartment. Fortunately for us, though, he can't leave the hotel, but he has the run of the hotel. So he can dine in style, meet the charming and or quirky guests who come and go, hobnob with the staff of the hotel, and have a marvelous and sometimes hysterically funny adventures. The book starts out a tad bit slow, but not bad, picks up speed as Count Rostov, our hero, is drawn deeper and deeper into the lives of the people he meets. On a more serious note, it reminds us no matter what the circumstances, life will go on, and it can still be filled with fun and adventure. That's also very existentialist because it's up to us. Okay, so it's really a must-read book. The Day the World Came to Town will do your heart good. It's nonfiction. And we all lived through the particular historical event that triggered it, the bombing of the World Trade Center and Pentagon on September 11th. If you remember, that air traffic was diverted or grounded, and many people were stranded and frightened and confused. The lucky ones went to Gander, Newfoundland, where their faith in humanity was restored. And this is the story of those people and the people of Gander who took them in to their hotels and homes and fed them and entertained them and gave them one of the most amazing ports in a storm that anyone could ever have imagined. This book will restore your faith in human beings, our goodness, and our competence. Do read it. It will make you just feel good about being human. It's not going to set the literary Thames on fire, but that doesn't matter. It's important. Okay, now the fluff. My choice of fluff is cozy mysteries. And I'm pretty picky. All the characters have to be nice people. They must behave themselves and do nothing tawdry or tacky. It's a plus if they drink tea, own cats or dogs, and love books. They must be fairly well written, but I'm not hugely picky. They must not be thrillers. The murders must be underdescribed, nothing grisly, and no police procedurals. In the end, the world must be set to rights. And fortunately for me, during the pandemic, I discovered The Vampire Knitting Club by Nancy Warren. This was recommended to me by a friend I thoroughly respect. The first 3 books, the entire set was on sale on Kindle for 99 cents, and I think it still is. The Skeptical. I decided to give them a try, and now I've blitzed my way through the first 6 of the books. They're perfect. They're set in a knitting shop in Oxford, England, owned by a young American who's just inherited the shop, who doesn't know how to knit, however. Strangely, her best patrons are a group of vampires that live under her store. And they really are a lovely bunch. They don't bite necks or suck blood out of victims or anyone else. They are civilized. They having established a legitimate blood bank that benefits not only them, but the students in Oxford, who often sell their blood to have money to party on the weekends, none the wiser as to the destination of their blood. The book also includes witches, demons, and light romance. I love these books. And I know a couple of you are already reading them, or at least one I know is blitzing through. The other person isn't on. Also, I blitzed my way through the Donna Andrews Christmas books. They're light, they're funny, and she does a whole bunch, but I'm just hitting the Christmas books at this point. They're light, they're funny, well written, and each one has a title with a pun on a bird's name. For instance, I just started this year's Christmas installment, The Gift of the Magpie. I've also read The Nightingale Before Christmas and Owl Be Home for Christmas, and another of them, others. So I say go for this. These are pretty substantially they're well written for cozy mysteries, and they have some substance. I love it. If you really, 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 really want the hardcore fluff, try Rhys Bowen's Her Royal Spyness, set in the 1930s, with the heroine who is like 35th in line to the throne of England and totally broke. This is fluff at its finest. The series takes a while to fulfill its potential, with some of the early installments being less good than they should be, but on the whole, the series is worth it. My favorite, in case anybody's interested, is The 12 Clues of Christmas, and set in the English countryside. You might also want to try Miranda James' Cat in the Stacks. Again, the first books in this series are kind of uneven, but overall the series is good. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 8 months or so, which most of you probably know because I talk to a lot of you quite frequently. So if there are any questions.
So, thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
You gave quite a list of reading materials. I'm hoping that you will make a list of those and just submit them to the All office so we can add that to the online presentation so people can go back and refer to this list of books, because it's quite a variety and gives everybody, I think, something to pick out of there that they would like. Do we have any questions right now? And if you do have a question, just unmute your mic and go ahead and ask. Mary Ann?
Yeah, Karen, you had some that were must reads, and I didn't get those down. If you put the list to all, or give the list to all, could you note which ones those are?
Yes.
Some of your favorites, in other words. One I thought was called The Sellout or something like that.
Yes.
That's not one that I know. And what were the other ones, if you want to do a quick review?
Let's see. Off the top of my head, it'll be better when I get the list to you, but
Okay.
God, I Love a Gentleman in Moscow.
Oh yeah, I've read that. Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, we read it in book club. Let's see, Susan, I'm in 3 book clubs, so pretty much everybody I know's read A Gentleman in Moscow. Let's see, what are others? I do think The Water Dancer is amazing. I think Invisible Man is amazing.
Yeah.
I think those were all must reads. I don't know, because the stuff in the pandemic, I do think The Great Influenza is.
Yeah.
But there are some I just like because I like literature and I like philosophy. So definitely, I'm going to love the Camus. I'm going to love the Catherine Ann Porter.
Right.
but I'm not sure those are for must reads for everybody.
Okay.
Thanks. Do we have anybody else who would like to ask a question? Okay.
I have a question, Jodine.
Oh, hi, Jodine.
Well,
How
hi,
are you?
Jodine.
We didn't
Hi
we didn't
there.
know who Galaxy S10 was.
Oh, wow, that's my name?
That's what showed up on the screen. So there you go.
That's pretty celestial. I was just thinking how wonderful this would be if we had this, if Karen would do this a couple times a year or quarterly, or it's wonderful.
Karen, are you amenable to continuing this as maybe a routine series?
I would, because I owe Florence big time.
Okay. Okay, this is great. Florence, you're on the line, so that gives you.
Why do you owe me, Karen? I don't know.
Oh, because you've done so much, and,
Well,
and
thank
you've
you.
always been there to like lend a hand in things I'm doing.
Yes. Yeah, I had to get away from my student here. He's down watching Minecraft or something because I thought I have to, take part in this program. So, yes, I'm sacrificing, kind of. But
Okay.
well worth it. I too would like to see the list because I might have trouble identifying who the authors are a little bit. So, yes, the list will help.
Yeah, I had meant to make a list, but I didn't finish it till like the whole thing here. I didn't finish it till like 10 minutes before I came online. So I was hoping to send a list because I mean I wouldn't have remembered any of them.
Yep.
Yeah, Karen, that'll be very helpful, and we can just include that in the materials that we send out to our members that might want to go back and listen to this, and then also we can do it as an attachment there. So I think it would be very helpful. I know I was not able to write down everything you're mentioning, so it would be greatly appreciated.
I would be happy to. Probably not until tomorrow.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. So do we have any other questions or anyone who would like to discuss any of the books she mentioned or have any feedback on what she's talked about? Okay. Well, if that is it,
I thought I was unmuted. I was just going to say that to me, the book that I really enjoyed was Trevor Noah's book. And also Gentleman Moscow. I mean, obviously, I'm not the in-depth reader that Karen is, but both of those were really engaging and very worth reading. So that's my 2 cents.
thank you.
I agree with you, Florence and Karen. Both of those are high on my list of I've already read, but I thoroughly enjoyed Trevor Noah's book for the voice he brings in it, and yet the concepts are really important and deep. I mean, if you think about them at all, and yet he has lived them.
Yeah, and so and also if you get a chance, this is one of the books that is really good on Audible because he is Trevor Noah, so the presentation is beautiful. With A Gentleman in Moscow, whatever. I don't think I have met anyone who hasn't liked it. I mean, it's one of those books people make awe noises over. And I mean, it is that kind of
Okay. Does anybody else have any feedback on any of the books that they may have read that Karen has mentioned?
I agree with The Gentleman in Moscow too being a favorite. Have not read the Trevor Noah book, but I will. But I would also like to see repeat performances by Karen.
Okay.
I owe Judy too.
So I guess you're going to pay some debts here, Karen. I'm not sure.
I think it probably gets me out of purgatory or something.
Something. So do we have anybody else? Okay. Karen, I guess we'll go ahead and end the session, and I want to thank you very much for putting this presentation together. Obviously, it's one that's garnered a lot of interest in our participants, and also that we really want to see you continue to do this series, maybe quarterly or something like that. You're obviously an avid reader, and I'm sure you'll have enough books in that period of time to recommend or discuss. And I think you've given us great insight into some new books that maybe many of us haven't read. So I certainly, from my standpoint, appreciate that. And I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to put this presentation together and share it with our members.
Well, thank you, and you're welcome, both at the same time.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I will go ahead and end the session and thank everybody that participated for coming on. And have a great day. Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.